those of you who got an invite, welcome to Nerd Prom.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With a hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents...
We want to take you on a quest for knowledge. One that will take us from ancient medieval fantasy across the far reaches of space to the distant future. To many savage worlds.
Okay, 1, 2, 5.
I don't need a countdown, man. Welcome to the Wild Die Podcast, episode 36. This is a podcast dedicated to Pinnacle Entertainment Savage Worlds, aimed at beginners and veterans alike. Today, who do we got on the show today? I see a couple of fresh faces. I'm liking this. We got some people to take over and do the talking for me. It's good stuff. What's happening, Eric?
Wow, you're actually going to let people do the talking for you?
Oh, just shots fired right out of the gate, mister. I see how it's going to be.
Yeah. Wow.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
But yeah, we do have some guests. We're going to talk about encounter balance. But before we talk about this, wanted to go back to last episode because we received some feedback from Matt Stark. Remember, it was basically our wish list for the next edition of Savage Worlds, and I mentioned that I'd like a nice book that might cost more because there's some nice illustrations in there. And well, Matt disagreed. That to him, the fact that it's $10 is why he got into Savage Worlds. And I agree, because that's one reason why I picked it up too. But it's still yeah. What about you guys? I think the $10 was a big thing, right? It's like, why not?
I think Matt needs to shut his bloody mouth, and I think maybe if you want to email in, if you got nothing nice to say, mate,
No, I mean his feedback was positive.
I do have to agree. I'm only joking. If I have to agree with him, because although this was Savage Worlds initially was bought for me as a gift, a lot of the reason all of my mates have got into it is because it's so cheap, and all of us have bought it, and that's kind of the reason. So I have to agree with him, because the reason that everyone gets into it initially is because you're like, that's a tenner, I may as well give it a try, and that's sort of it. And so I do agree with him. And I think if it was more expensive, you just wouldn't, because it's just like, oh, it's this weird system that I don't even know, and it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to spend $40 on it. Or even 20.
Yeah, but there are new RPGs that come out every week that are $50 or $60, but because the cover looks great, people buy it. So it's a
fair
difficult.
point. It's a fair point. Yeah, I don't know.
So that was my point, basically, and also the fact that after 14 years, I think it deserves some.
Yeah, I think they
nice
can
artwork.
They can afford a fresh coat of paint by now, can't they?
So it's a good thing nobody really cares what Matt Stark thinks. So.
Wow, that's mean. And the other thing we talked about last episode, while we introduced our contest for our 2 years anniversary, where the first prize is a Savage Rifts box set, second prize $20 gift certificate for Drive-Thru RPG, and everybody gets to have their idea put into a one-sheet setting. So the contest basically is send us your idea, your synopsis for a one-sheet setting, and yeah, I don't get to vote. I get to put all those entries into a document where there's no name, and then Harrison, Gary, and Manuel will be the judges. So they don't know who sent that, so that way there's no favoritism and that kind of stuff. And the best one will win. So the meat of the show, it's basically one segment today. We're going to take it to the edge with a discussion on encounter balance, more specifically through the eye of one of our guests. He's been on the show before and back by popular demand. He's the pure mongrel, Mr. Paris Conte.
G'day, how you going?
Jingle.
I want to apologise before we play this jingle, Paris, because you've been on before. I made you a new one, but I didn't really put the time in with this one. So, yeah.
Paris Conte.
The last bit at the end, was that meant to be, or was that just like lunch?
It was like a trumpet.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
It's like a trumpet you stole from a hobo that had 3 broken notes on it. It just had like a 1-note deal.
But we've also got another guest on the show, all the way from Germany. It's Manuel Sams, everyone. No, I'm only joking. Florian, how you doing, man?
Hi, I'm your replacement German for today.
Yeah. We got rid of one, we got another one on. That's how it works. I put a little bit more effort into your jingle because you're a new guy. But if you come on again, you're going to get the same treatment.
So did you know that Florian Krell is a Viking? Oh, really? Did you know that head Vikings used to take mushrooms and then urinate into a cup and give it to the lesser Vikings, and the lesser Vikings would drink that, hoping that they would gain some semblance of the power of the head Vikings? Oh, God. I hope he doesn't do that. His name is Florian Krell, and he's actually a Viking. If you mess with him, you better go hiking, cause his enemies will be victim to a Viking. It's fun, but he's still accurate with his striking. If you're not the type of guy that's to his liking, he's a lifer and he's not above a bit of fighting. He was normal once, but he had a UFO sighting.
How about that?
You don't know how fucking hard it was for me to refrain from laughing and ruining your jingle. Yeah, man, crazy stuff. Okay, so to get that problem off your chest, I'm not gonna urinate in a cup, and I'm fresh off the mushrooms. So
okay,
no
good.
There.
I'm pleased.
So the reason I invited Florian is because, well, Paris' problem with encounter balance has been ongoing. I've tried to help him. He's listened to other podcasts too. He's read quite a bit. He's done his research. But I found Florian on YouTube talking about Savage Worlds and the randomness, encounters, balance, that kind of thing. And I think he brings something new to the table, a new voice, new ideas. So it's not the same, 5 or 6 guys that talk about Savage Worlds on YouTube and Twitch and podcasts anymore. And he's got some good ideas. So we're going to listen to those ideas, and hopefully that will help Paris. You guys are ready to do this? Ready to take it to the edge?
You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
Our wash machine blew up this year, so I replaced it, and the one that I got now, when it's done, it literally it goes ding 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 ding.
All right, so for Take It to the Edge, what I want to do first is hear from Paris's mouth what's going on. First, Paris, explain what your expectations of a good, challenging encounter is. Expectations are, and why? Because there's a specific reason why you're looking for this, right?
Yeah, as you guys know, the last time I was on your podcast, I work with kids. I use role-playing games with kids to teach certain skills and therapy and that sort of stuff. So while I'll get this out of the way first. I love Savage Worlds, right? I love a lot of the mechanics. I love a lot of the way that it works. And I'm not normally a rules guy, except when it comes to combat, because combat to me is something that needs to be, well, I mean, that's the fairness of the game, right? So if someone knows they hit or they miss or whatever the case may be, and it solves the argument at the table. Now, the problem that I had as a beginning GM with Savage Worlds was that the encounters that I was producing were either too easy or too hard. So either the kids would just mop up everything in the room and yawn, or me thinking that, well, that was too easy, so let me bump up the difficulty level, and then they couldn't hit, they couldn't damage, etc., which would then create disappointment because they couldn't do what they wanted to do. So that's one thing. So the first thing is I'm not looking for balance. That's not exactly what I'm looking for, because there are times when I want the encounter to be too difficult. I want them to run, or I want them to move to somewhere else, or know that this is something they have to come back to later. And sometimes I do want it too easy. The problem I have is that when I look at what I'm going to put on the table, I just don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what it's worth. All edges, an edge may take a slot, but the value of an edge, it is vastly different, and so when I'm trying to build an encounter that I think will challenge them, I can't seem to do it. That's my first problem. My second problem is with the whole exploding dice thing. So I want you to imagine this for a second, right? We're all playing a game. I'm GMing. You four are playing. So Eric, your cleric spends a couple of rounds getting all their buffs ready, and they're boosting, smite on this weapon and armor on this guy, and then the mage is getting the fireballs ready, about to crack off bolt, and Grim, you're sitting there and you've got your arrow knocked and you're about to take a shot, and then Gary kicks open the door. There is the big bad at the end of the adventure. We've all been fighting so hard to get to this point. It's all excited. We're pumped. Gary rolls some dice. It's dead. 40 points of damage. I've spent every penny trying to soak it. You guys are all sit there. You're all pumped up, glowing. Your weapons are on fire. There's lights everywhere, and the big bad fell over. That's it. End of adventure. End of scenario. And I look at these poor kids and they look at me like, "Is that it?" And I'm looking at the dice because I've asked this question, as you said. I've asked this question times of people saying, "Oh, send in a second wave," or hide your dice behind your GM screen, or whatever the case may be. There's a real trust thing that's involved in the program that I run. So I don't hide things and I don't fudge things. So it's straight up. Whatever the dice do, the dice do. The problem is, in that scenario, it just falls flat. Now, don't get me wrong. We've had the situation where we've taken out one kid has taken out a Leviathan with a smited pork sandwich, and that literally choked the thing to death because he did this massive roll, right? Which was fantastic. Everyone thought was funny. But at this end of this particular adventure, where the massive demon that was sending out wave after wave and causing him all these problems, and this thing was going to destroy the world if they didn't kill it, and the barbarian literally strolls through and trips on it, and it dies. It was like, it was very, very anticlimactic. That is my problem with Savage Worlds. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
That's why I think this is an interesting subject, because I've seen that happen plenty of times, to be honest, with the big bad being killed instantly. But I personally think that actually is so unbelievably common, and like you said, the exploding dice often do make things just get killed instantly, and a lot of people save their bennies for the final encounter as well. And it's like, okay, I'm going to try and hit it. You miss. You roll low, and then you spend a penny. You roll low, spend a penny. You roll low, spend a penny. Okay, I've hit it. Brilliant. And you try to get the absolute best roll until you explode 1,000,000 times, and you're like, cool, killed it in one hit. Let's go home, everybody.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I, if that just, as you said, if that happened once or twice, I could probably let it go. But it just seems to happen just too much. And while I want my guys to, I'm not actively out there to beat them or anything like that. I want them to succeed, but it needs to have meat to it. It has to have drama. It has to have that satisfaction level that they fought something that was worthy of them, or they went above and beyond and really rose to the challenge, instead of the lead guy walks in and goes poke and it falls over, and that's it.
This happened in a con game that I played where it was a Flash Gordon one, because obviously you could just use Slipstream to play a Flash Gordon game. You don't actually need a separate Flash Gordon book. And we just walked in on Ming the Merciless, and in one round we just completely destroyed him, and it was hilarious for a con game. But imagine if you did it after like a 6-month campaign and you just walked in on the last bad guy and killed him, and it could totally happen. But
right. So what I'm hearing here is anticlimactic boss battles, and it seems to happen too frequently. I mean, it's not like once every 5 or 6 games. It's pretty much every other game, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it happens that often?
Oh, look, it does happen quite frequently. Like, you've got to remember too that I play anywhere with up to 8 guys at a time, right? So the chances that one of them is going to do the exploding dice is pretty often. And when you see, like, because I spend a lot of time getting these guys to think about how they're going to fight as a group and plan. So there's, I'm going to do this trick. I'm going to try and take it from the left. You take it from the right. We're going to work out on all these, gang up bonuses, blah, 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 whatever. They work out their plan. And the first guy that walks in takes it out. The plan was pointless. And I guess from my perspective too, coming from a wargaming background and understanding that this game is based on a war game, right? This is just like, if I'd have spent 8 months painting models for this one battle, right? And then my opponent rolls the dice and my entire army falls over from one exploded roll, I would be just, I flip the table, man. I'd be out, that'd be just, my general dies in one shot. All these monsters are just nothing. So the problem that I have, and I'm not after an attrition system, I'm not looking anything like that. I'm just wondering if there can be a cap on wounds or just whatever it is. I'm obviously everybody loves this game. There are heaps of products out there. I don't agree that it can't do fantasy. I think it can do fantasy very well, but there is that time when you finally, we're going to face our arch nemesis, and he just turns out to be a pansy and falls over from a sneeze. It's just terrible. And it's really, really disappointing. When you see these kids' faces like you've just stolen all their puppies and they're just looking at you like, it's not a lot of fun. So tell me, guys.
I think I have a resolution to your problem. You've been hinting at it as we've been talking. It needs to have some meat. There should be some table flipping in it. And you want to get rid of that look of lost puppiness in the eyes of the people that you're playing with. And you can solve all of your problems with a bucket of KFC, 20-piece. This is what you do. In the event that happens and your boss goes down, you rip your shirt off and make your best, I'm going to eat this 20-piece bucket of chicken face, that game face. And then you flip your table over and literally like start eating the chicken and getting all greased up, like Harrison has to say. And then you wade into the battle and start fighting these 20 guys that you're with.
Maybe go through a little quick checklist here. Are you using the adventure cards?
Adventure cards?
Yeah, you don't use the adventure cards? If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you aren't.
No.
Are you using any?
Oh, you mean? Oh no, sorry. Yeah, I do use the adventure cards where they can. Well, I deal out a card to each player, and they can. Yeah.
Okay, so you're using those. And are you using any house rules? Because I know I've seen some of your sheets, character sheets, and those are, I think, for the first session when people are introduced. But you've changed the rules a little bit, dumbed them down to make them more accessible.
In terms of house rules, no, I don't use anything that's not found either in the setting or the Savage Worlds book. Greedy damage is used. Can't re-roll on double ones. No, nothing that I've house ruled there.
All right, Florian, what do you have to say?
Is there a KFC near your house?
Actually, just before Florian jumps in, I just want to add one more thing because I did watch his YouTube video, which I found rather interesting. I have a problem with GM bennies as in terms of the program that I do. Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned in your video was to save a stack of these bennies and then use them at the end, right? The problem with that from the program that I do is that's like me basically trying to beat them, and I can't do that, right? So I don't tend to use GM bennies because if I stack up 8 GM bennies plus the 2 from the monster, I got 10, and I'm just throwing them out all the time. That feels like I'm cheating them, if you get what I'm trying to say. So I'll use the 2 that comes with the monster, but I very rarely use GM bennies. All right, I'll be quiet now and be educated.
Yeah, shut up.
Yeah, the really interesting twist for me to the problem that you're having is that I didn't realize before that you're playing with like young adults and children. And that really gives it a twist, because kids can be, they can have that real sense for what is just and what isn't. And if you start doing too much house rules, too much deviation from what's in the game, they tend to start to feel more cheated more easily than if you're playing with a group of adults. So that's the twist. And you said that you don't want to use Game Master's bennies too much. Maybe just from my point of view, I tend to use them quite a lot, but my worlds usually feature not only the enemies and the bosses and stuff like that, but often I have NPCs there as well. And if shit starts to hit the fan, and the NPCs in there, from their perspective, realize that the heroes here could need a hand, they are likely to get help. And even if it's just an extra going in, what that gives me is the opportunity to take my GM bennies and spend them on that extra. So it's not only that it's not I have 10 bennies and I'm going to use all of them against you. It's I have 10 bennies here, and I, as a game master, can use them on any side I want. So it gives you that useful tool where it doesn't, and they don't need to feel cheated when at the end of the benny there are still like 4 bennies sitting at your table because you didn't need to use them. That's maybe one thing that I could say to regarding the game master's bennies. Apart from that, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff which you touched on already, because when you're talking about encounter balance, you have like different approaches to it. You have the proactive part where you try to balance the encounter, you try to figure out how tough your NPC needs to be a challenge for your players. And I'm not too big a fan. Eric said he wasn't as well, so we're in good company here. But, well, I think I'm telling you nothing new here, but maybe for some of our listeners, you just tend to figure out, can they hit it? So you look at their dice, how likely is it they beat the target number to hit it, parry, etc. You think about how much damage your players can do, and can they achieve the toughness? How likely can they achieve the toughness? That's that proactive part. But that's something I'm not too fond of doing because it's a lot of work and I'm a lazy GM. What I try to do instead is focus on the reactive part of balancing encounters, and that's mostly to do with managing your narrative and using the reactive part of the game mechanics, which is mostly features in bennies. And then there might be a third thing that might be worth considering, and that is house rules. But if you say for your table house rules are pretty much a no-go, then that's not really something that can help you out here.
They're not no-go in the sense that, like one of the things you mentioned too was if you implemented a rule or an edge or whatever the case may be, then they get to use it. So I have no problem with that, because we could work with that as a group and say, all right, guys, this is the house rule that we have. I get their input. We can even work on it together, because they're just as eager to have an interesting game as they are to they just want to enjoy it. So, for instance, we've actually stopped playing fantasy because of this particular issue, and we've actually gone over to Rippers. Rippers has been quite interesting because there's been a lot more social interaction in that game for us, which is a big thing for the program. Which actually, when it's finished, I'd love to talk about that game at another time. But so now with this game, there's a far less at the moment. There's far less melee combat like you'd find in a fantasy game, and it's mostly ranged. A lot of it is ranged. We haven't played enough combat yet for it to be a problem, but yeah, it's just going back to the times of encounters. You're right. I just don't have the time to do, sit down and work out what my bad guys should have so that they match this, that, and the other. Eric did enlighten me with some of the monstrous abilities, which I wasn't using in the beginning. The problem I've had is because I've never actually played Savage Worlds as a player. No one around me plays Savage Worlds. It's something that I've picked up on, and I've only GM'd it. So I think there's a lot of nuance to the game that I'm not aware of. And my biggest problem has been that and I've said this before, is when I've gone to the community, and look, 98% of the community is fantastic, but I've noticed that whenever myself or another new GM ask the question like this, encounter balance, or why is this happening? Why is dice spiking? Why is it destroying my game? They've essentially been told, A, you don't get it, or B, go play D&D, which is, it's not a way that you attract people to your community. So talking to one of the reasons that the Wild Die is huge on my list of podcasts to listen to, and now your YouTube channel is because you don't talk to the person like they're an idiot, like you're sitting up high and saying, this game is fantastic, you didn't get it, so you must be in the wrong. And I admit that I'm, in terms of GMing, I'm still new to the system, and I'm still working on making it work. So what monstrous abilities do you use? And more to the point, I think something that I'm only learning recently is, how do you set up your encounters by using the environment and maybe the dangers in the background, not so much the creatures themselves when you build an encounter?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. So if you want to make your encounter tougher and more adaptable, a way you can do it is to build it, like you said, not only using the creature, but also using the background. So if they are encountering an opponent, and that opponent isn't just that assortment of stats, like if it's a demon, it's probably a combination of tough, smart, and intuitive. It's going to have high smarts, it's going to have high spirit. So he's probably good at adapting as well. He might be arrogant and all that, but if he's pressed, he can turn to tactical advantage and try to figure something out what he does. And that means it's good for you as a game master to think about, well, how can that terrain, that whatever I'm using, benefit my encounter, my creature that I'm using in it. I played Rippers like 2 weeks ago, and I had a demon, and he's just slaughtered a pup. And so I had a whole lot of corpses. I had tables, I had a bar, so I knew there would be cover available. All those dead creatures might be useful if he was to raise zombies. When I know, they're gonna kick in the door now, it's gonna get tough, maybe I need a diversion. I could maybe spend an action and have him start raising zombies. Stuff like that. And if the encounter gets out of hand, he's a demon. In Rippers, they are pretty much fireproof. A bar with like sawdust strewn ground and liquors all over the place, you can just let it go up in flame. And all that are points that can give you something to work with if your encounter starts to go off the rails. But it has the beauty that you don't need to do it. No one's forcing you like a stat block. If it says toughness 21, your players might tend to notice if you start using 14 toughness instead, because you think it's too hard all of a sudden. But then again, if your encounter goes way you don't want to, and that demon is just getting arrogant and not using his tactical advantage as he should. That's something you can build into the narrative, though there's a narrative part of encounter balancing, and that's pretty much got to do with thinking before you start the encounter, thinking what advantages are there, and since you're the GM, you can just make them up. You can build the encounter in a way that there are tactical advantages to be had if you want them to, you know?
Yeah, but there's no mechanic for that, is there?
No.
Not that I know of, no. That's one thing we talked about in the last episode, is that this is a small book, right? They only put so much in there. They gave you the basics, and pretty much you figure out the rest, right? And this is where a lot of problems come from, where people have to learn the hard way. I've learned the hard way that if I don't want my bad guy to die, I don't put it in the encounter. He can't be reached. As soon as he's on the table, anything goes. Isn't there an old D&D saying that, if it has HP, it can be killed? So that's one part of it. If you look at the most, well, maybe not the most memorable villains, because I know not everybody's watched it, but if you've watched Game of Thrones, King Joffrey was probably one of the most hated villains on this show. And the writers didn't put King Joffrey in the middle of the street where all the people that hate him could take him out in one round, because that's what would happen. He's just a little kid. He would get killed. But you get to hate him with what he's doing to people instead.
Yeah.
Sorry, doesn't that limit then the kind of encounters that you can do? I mean, let's say take Strad from D&D, right? I haven't played it, but I've read through some of the book, and he appears quite a number of times. Like, he rocks up, taunts the characters, and the characters could try and take him down. Yeah, good luck with that. You can't do that in Savage Worlds. If Strad rocks up and someone rolls those dice and they explode all over the place.
I did a video lately about what actually happens before your character dies. And the same thing applies to NPCs. And if you take wounds, if you take the force wounds or something, it's not your dad. It's you have a vigor roll, and after you had your vigor roll, you see where you are severely injured, and that might mean you're not effectively in the encounter. But if an adventurer pulls out his crossbow, shoots Strad, and is hit in the arm, he's at 4 wounds. He can't soak them. Yeah. He's hit in the arm, you make the vigor roll, he might be severely injured in the arm, but that still means he can retreat, to kill someone, to really finish him off.
He's incapacitated, though. He's still a non-factor.
But this brings me to a point that I wanted to make as well, is that when I do bosses that I want to be a massive challenge, and I don't want them to just kill it in one round. If you can take a leaf out of like video games book, right? See, often in video games, because they will account for the fact that during these games you can pick up a bunch of rocket launcher ammo or whatever, and then a lot of players will save it for the boss. But so that you don't just blast all of your rocket launcher ammo at the boss and kill it in 30 seconds, what they'll do is there'll be some sort of trick to when you can hit the boss, or when you can damage it, or there's like a puzzle around when you can hit the boss, right? So sometimes I'll try to build boss encounters like that in my games. For example, when I played Deadlands, there was a session I did where, like, really, really, really typical thing of westerns, where this gang was going to come and try and take over the town. The town knew it was going to happen, so they had time to repair, right? When the gang came, all of the gang started riding in on their horses, and people were standing on roofs, taking all the people out, and they saw the gang leader walking in, and it was like obscured by sand, and it was like it was just this big shadowy figure. So one guy gets his rifle out, shoots the guy, dice explodes, takes him out, and the guy just falls to the floor, and everyone was like, yeah, we killed him in one hit. And then 2 rounds later, the guy sort of shambles back to his feet. And the trick was that this guy was actually a zombie with intelligence, and that was it. And he would just keep getting back up. He couldn't be killed. That was the trick. So if they wanted to win this fight, they were going to have to tie him up and lock him in a coffin and bury him underground. He wasn't going to be able to be killed. That was the whole fun of the battle. Yeah. So they couldn't kill him in one hit. But if you incorporate some kind of trick to beating the monster instead of just wounds, or whatever, or maybe you can only damage the boss by a certain means. Maybe you have to get him into the right position, or maybe you have to take a shield down, or maybe there's something you have to do in the room first before you can damage the guy. Something like that. Then you know the battle's going to last a couple more rounds before they're able to kill him, at least.
Rippers is working really nicely in that way in a few parts, because much of the big deal about hunting monsters and Rippers is figuring out their weaknesses, and many of the bigger ones, like Dracula and stuff, cannot be killed. They cannot take wounds from certain things, only from their weaknesses. So if Strad pops up and he had the stats of Dracula and Rippers, and you fire a crossbow at him, will he be dead? Only if you really know the stuff you need to know about the monster, because he might have only specific weaknesses that you can target. And so in Ripper's big part of figuring out how to kill your big bad evil guy is doing your research, doing your legwork, figuring out, reading grimoires, who is this guy? How can I actually kill him? And they changed things up a bit, because often the named NPCs do not have the same weaknesses necessarily. Then, like every vampire is vulnerable to sunlight, maybe the boss vampire has some minor artifact or something that, or is just old enough as a vampire to not have all the weaknesses or have different ones. And in Rippers, that's part of the mechanic they work with.
The problem with that is that you can't have every guy that rolls in. What if you're just playing a gangster game and you're like 1940s mobster? You can't just have the guy poof disappear and reappear at a later time. You're in a kind of an odd and rough predicament, because you're essentially breaking the game and trying to look for a fix. If you were using the DM bennies as they were supposed to be used, you're going to find that you get that plasticity from using the bennies. So you're kind of in a tough spot. And I know that you work with kids. I don't want to say special needs, but special kids, let's just say. And I don't want to really make excessive amounts of jokes, because I don't know the extent of the specialty of these kids, but I'm just thinking to myself, man, if you can't use GM pennies, what you should do is just take some tissues and some candies, and then in that sweet Australian accent, you just walk up to the kid and you put the candy wrapped in the tissue on his desk, and you're like, here's a candy, and you're gonna need the tissue because I'm about to fuck you right up with my GM bennies. and then just go back and start using your GM bennies. But you can't really do that, right? So
no, that's not a big thing. But you made an interesting point with the idea of, and this is what I'm asking, and this actually isn't just with my program. Like I do play this game with friends and stuff, right? So let's say I'm playing Beasts and Barbarians, right? And you've walked into a town and it's supposed to be the champion of this region, right? You're a first level you're a novice. This guy's a legendary character, and still a novice with an exploding dice can take a legendary warrior and wipe him out in one hit, right? How do you balance that?
Well, I think that's I think what a lot of people will say about that is that that's part of the fun of it, right? I mean, the idea is that the reason that a novice could take out a legendary warrior with that is the way, if I was jamming a game, the way I would narratively tell that is that the novice got lucky. Okay, so in that case, he's gone in, he's flailed around like an idiot, and then whoops, okay, the sword goes into his armor and gets him in just the right point, and the legendary warrior is like, oh, felled by such a fool, who'd have thought it? And then he goes down like a sack of potatoes, and that's kind of the thing. Like I don't know, it's just that's part of the fun, because Gary put it a very good way before. It's that in D&D, somebody points a crossbow at you you know it only does 1d6 damage and it's not going to hurt you. Whereas a commoner can come out of a house in Savage Worlds and point a crossbow at you, and you know, no matter how big a dude you are, it can take you out, because a crossbow can be deadly if you get shot in the right place. And that's why the exploding dice thing works. But sometimes it does, unfortunately, screw up your encounters. And it's to me, it's just going to happen. And that is another point that I wanted to make, that I know this is a very unhelpful thing to say, but sometimes I don't necessarily think that balance is that important. But because for realism's sake, like I just said, I mean, I prefer it not necessarily to be balanced, but like you said, you want people to feel challenged and stuff like this. So I will give you a helpful tip as well if you want. Do you want a helpful tip as well? Here's one, right? Do traps as well.
Here's the helpful tip. What's your helpful tip, Harrison?
Do loads of traps. Force them to use their bennies by doing loads of traps. Now, that doesn't really help if you're doing a gangster game or something like that. But if traps will force them to use bennies, and it won't necessarily feel that cheap. And then when it comes to the big boss, they won't have loads of bennies to try and kill it with.
Actually, one of the things that I love about Savage Worlds is that a crossbow bolt can take anyone out. And the amount of times it's been brought up in D&D that you could shoot a crossbow bolt at a creature right between the eyes, and if it's a high enough level, it just giggles and walks off. I think where I've come to is more how to prepare my players for this inevitability of Savage Worlds. So, for instance, as a GM, one of my first mistakes was that I've learned is that I took the Savage Worlds core rules, the fantasy companion, sci-fi companion, etc. I took them as gospel, right? So they were the rules I referenced because there's nowhere really. It probably does say it in the book, but I never picked it up, where it says, "Look, this is a guide. This is just the skeleton, right? You actually have to build everything around it." Right. So when it's not like D&D where you go and find on page 57 the table that you need, what you're really looking at, or the spell, or whatever the case may be, what you've got here is the core of stuff. So I guess what I'm really asking is, for a new GM like myself, no matter who you're playing for, what's the checklist that you should have, I guess, in terms of what you should have ready to make your players understand what's coming, and yourself too, so that you don't falter? Because I tell you, when that big bad goes down and you've set everything up and it just bleh, right? If you're not used to that, it's like you just stumbled, your car stalled, the whole adventure's come to a grinding halt, and you have to bring it back up.
Okay, here's the checklist, right? Player's handbook, DM guide, go back to D&D. You're a wimp.
Don't be that.
Bucket of chicken.
What you're saying here is a really tough question, because I realized that when I play with people who come from other systems, it helps if I prepare them for how Savage Worlds is gonna be and stuff like that. But they will still be used to their old standards. Then they won't really be necessarily expecting what's up there. You can, of course, prepare them, like focus on how deadly combat is. Like, you never know who's gonna walk out alive. Every encounter is dangerous. That's something you can put into the narrative. But it's really hard. People will still be stuck in their old ways if they have some, or, well, every kid has watched cartoons and whatnot. They have an understanding of how they think it should be handled. What I think might be of help is I've taken a lot from my game mastering advice from a setting called Apocalypse World, a really nice one. And one of what they say is, your job as a game master is not to play as hard or to overly challenge your players. They don't phrase it in that way. They say your job is to make your characters' lives interesting. Mm-hmm. And interesting can come in many ways. And it doesn't need to feel particularly interesting in the moment that the scrawny kid just killed a legendary barbarian. Mm-hmm. You can up with the interesting parts after that. So maybe the scrawny kid just kill the legendary barbarian. Every like ruffian wanted to make his name killing that legendary barbarian. Who's there to kill now? The scrawny kid. That's a pretty up thing, you know? Now he's the guy who killed Conan, so no, I'm gonna beat him up. And that's a pretty interesting thing to play with.
Yep.
And it isn't necessarily represented in game terms. And I know it's easy for me saying it now, because when I'm in a session, I sometimes, I didn't expect this to happen. What am I gonna do now? Being creative when you're pressed, when you're between a rock and a hard place, is not as easy as when we five guys are sitting here together and talking about what could possibly happen. But if you think about it, like making your characters' lives interesting, you tend to get a whole different view than if you say you want to challenge them with an encounter, because then you think in terms of game terms and damage and how many bennies have they got left.
I was just gonna say, I think what Florian is saying is back to my KFC chicken killing your students. Instead of focusing on the entire group, just narrow in on the one guy that killed Conan and take your rage out on that kid.
Right.
Why do you want to bully the kids so much, man? What's wrong with you?
Sorry.
I think what Florian said goes with what I've been trying to tell Paris is Paris wants to use a screwdriver to hammer a nail, and I'm handing him a hammer, pretty much showing you that you're trying to do it one way. And we're trying to tell you, don't do it that way, do it another way. And I think Florian added the perfect example there of where, okay, the encounter wasn't challenging at all, but it became interesting. And that's how I had to change my my view on creating encounters for Savage Worlds, where yes, you should always surround your bad guy wild card with other extras to buffer it up. There's the fanatics setting role, and I know a friend of mine says it's lame sauce, but once you see that as part of an ability and not a cheat, isn't there something like in 5e where there's like a layer encounter or something like that?
Saving throws. No, but yeah, and I'm sure you heard them all, Paris, where fanatics put extras with your wild card. Usually that will help. It's not 100% proof, but the fact is, it's a freak incident when that happens, when your bad guy goes down in the first round. And look at it as a crit. It's a critical. This should be celebrated. The game isn't about your bad guys. The game is about the players and their characters. They're the star of the show. You as the GM, you have the whole world behind you. You populate that world with whatever you want to bring in. The characters, it's only them, right? So you have to bounce off. Okay, they took down my bad guy in one round. What happens now? There's consequences for that. Maybe the guy wasn't working alone. Maybe it made it worse because he's dead now. And the players didn't know that. They should have researched that guy before that. Maybe he wasn't all that bad and really he was trying to help, and now something worse is going to happen with the world because he's not there to act as a buffer or whatever. And that's what I mean by rolling with the punches. Okay, Savage Worlds happen. My bad guy that I planned for so long and I really liked him, he's no more. But
conversely, if you're genuinely annoyed that they took your bad guy down, just have it that it was an exact clone of him and have another one step out of an adjacent room.
Here's his twin brother.
Yeah. And then if they take him down in one round, another one steps out of a cupboard. And then if they take him down in one round, another one crashes through the window.
Haven't we seen that in other works of fiction where you kill the monster and then he becomes like a puddle, and then there's another monster bigger that comes out of that?
I'm really playing devil's advocate. I've picked up a few things myself. One thing that I actually sort of was hoping to discuss with you guys tonight too was, I think one of the problems I had when I first came across the Savage Worlds was I was too focused on combat. So I'd taken my cues from a lot of other role-playing games where combat was always the focus of the game, right? So the battling your way through the dungeon, the space battles, the whatever the case may be. I think one thing that doesn't get said enough to new GMs of Savage Worlds is that combat, Savage Worlds has so much more to offer. And I think when you look at the book itself, there's a big part of it put to combat because combat's a big thing. But how do you build games or adventures or whatever where combat actually takes a backseat, but it's still very challenging and it's still very exciting and all that? Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe I don't know if I'm saying it correctly.
To me, Savage Worlds feels much like an action movie. There's chases, there's stuff, there's traumatic tasks you might defeat, but it feels like an action movie. And maybe a way to think about it, what happens if there comes, a big bad guy comes, someone pulls out his gun, shoots him. What would make a good follow-up in an action movie for that? Will there be... Your NPC will likely be gone. I think if you just say, well, I have a clone or something like that, that's pretty cheesy. I don't like that approach. You can do it, of course, but
that's
not something... Yeah, I know. But you might do it from time to time. I don't know.
Maybe as a son or a daughter.
That happens to look exactly like him.
Well, that would not be in a if you have a world and your conflicts go slower, every time someone important is killed, that creates a power vacuum. So there's just one less evil guy around now, and all the others start to really fall apart. And if many violent guys go apart at the seams, that's not something that creates less tension. That's, if anything, more of a plot hook. But what I actually wanted to say when I began thinking about it was the action movie kind of thing. So what would make a good follow-up for that? Don't take your violence, your stakes back, but if you kill that demon, will it implode and suck the players into hell? Whatnot. It's all, you need to be creative on the fly. Yeah, that's challenging, but a good way to think about it is, if you didn't want to end the scene in an action movie, what would happen now that keeps the tension up?
That's that's just give me that's really good advice, actually. Just think about that monster at the end of my big bad. If we're looking back on it now, the problem that I did was I had the big bad in the center of the room and it was just a room. What I should have had was the big bad who got a bunch of minions to jump in the way of the warrior. There's a portal that's widening and two of the characters have to run off and try and shut it down. And then on top of that, whatever they have to, someone has to go grab an item and bring it to the other characters. They can insert it in the hole or whatever the case may be, and the warrior's being harassed. So when you said the action movie thing, that makes a lot of sense, because Bruce Willis didn't just run into a room and shoot the bad guy. He had to dodge glass. There was multiple people shooting at him. There was obstacles in the way. He had to run because there was an explosion or whatever the case may be. Conan may have fought, his battles are not just against one guy. There's multiple people running at him from all over the place. And I think those examples, that was brilliant. So I want to thank you for that, because those examples help. Just to me, I've noticed that there are a lot of GMs out there that don't have the experience, or they don't have the storytelling more than anything. And people keep sort of pushing mechanics at them, or you're getting the mechanics wrong, or if you don't like our mechanics, go to D&D. Right. Whereas maybe we should be talking more about what storytelling elements that Savage Worlds gives us beyond what other games give us. If that makes sense.
There's something, and Gary will remember because we keep talking about it. We played a Beast and Barbarians game together, ran by Matt Stark. We were just talking about him. And
were you both naked and covered in grease?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah,
Grease and barbarians.
But yeah, Greece and barbarians, and we keep talking about it because it's the final battle. We get into this temple, and Matt puts up this map for us where we're about 200 squares away from the bad guy, and we're all melee guys. We have 6 pace, and we have to get to that bad guy at the other end of the temple, and he's tossing fireballs at us.
Yeah.
Once we get into range, and he backs away every round.
Yeah. And as we get closer, the fireball's coming, but he's adding minions just to keep us entertained. And as much as I poke and rib him for screwing that encounter up by making us chase this guy for 50 frickin' rounds, it actually added an element of, once you got there, you actually felt satisfied that you killed this thing in one shot. But yeah, it was good.
It seems like that's what the guy would have done. The boss would have done that. It's not. He wouldn't have just stood there waiting for you to come up. He would have just backed off and chucked the fireballs.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, that goes with what I've said before. You have to play your villains and your NPCs smart, or at least as smart as they're supposed to be. They'll be expecting you. They'll have security measures set up against you coming to get them. They'll have traps on the way there. They might be on top of a mountain. Now roll vigor for fatigue to get up that mountain. Now the PCs get to the bad guy and they're at -1 to all their rolls because they're fatigued, and unless they take a rest. And if they take a rest, you spring an ambush on them and you don't give them any rest. You can't think of an encounter as just, I'm going to put, like you said, I'm going to put this guy right in the middle of the room alone with no obstacle between him. He could be up on the ledge shooting fireballs or bow and arrow at them, and now they have to find the stairway all the way to him or knock something down so he falls off. The guy can't be fought hand to hand. He might duck behind a low wall there, and now you can't really hit him. You have to make that switch when you create an encounter for Savage Worlds, because like I said, as soon as you put a guy into play, he has stats. He can die in one round. That's just how it is.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that it's a role playing game, and that when you're playing your NPCs and even your extras and stuff, you're role playing them and play them as they would be. Even if it's a crappy goblin, remember, you play them like you would a goblin. So if you're playing a big bad guy, or even just a person, even if it's an extra and it's a person like a normal human being, play them like you would a normal human being. Would the boss really just sit there and wait for the guys to turn up? He can hear them fighting in the hallway. So would he just sit there waiting to take a bullet? No, he would probably hide by the door, wait for the first guy to come in and shoot him in the head. I mean, that's what you would do. You wouldn't be sitting there waiting in the room for them to kick the door in and take a first shot and take him out in one hit. He'd be hiding or whatever. He'd set something up. He wouldn't. He would play it smart, as Eric said. Play the NPCs like you would play them if you were a player.
I would go even further than that, because if you just quick in, if you have a major NPC. He usually has a goal, so you can let that guide your encounter, because when I create NPCs, there isn't really that often the case that the big bag evil guy's goal is to kill the player characters. He wants to achieve something. That expanding hell portal might be his way to draw more demons or something, and you can let that goal guide your encounter design. And if he has no real reason in that encounter to really engage the player characters, because he could die, then maybe he will just try to get away, and the encounter will be more of a chase thing. Because, well, if he doesn't need to engage them, then you might just go and have another action scene, which is a chase, which I did with a demon in my campaign like 2 weeks ago or something, because he'd taken 2 wounds and he wasn't having any of that, so off he went. And then my rippers chased a flying demon all over London. Well, ended up a cool scene, but, well, you can let your goals of your characters guide your encounter design in that way.
Yeah, or maybe if they're trying to get away, they might do something to cut off the party. For instance, push a cupboard in their way, or drop a bunch of marbles, or smash a Molotov on the floor and leg it, or whatever. But it immediately makes it more interesting.
One of the big learning things for me is watching and listening to other dungeon masters play and seeing what they do, their tips and tricks and stuff like that. And you'll learn a lot from that. But Savage Worlds, when I first came over to it and started playing it, was a huge learning curve for me. Like this game is so much different in that aspect than playing Dungeons and Dragons. It really made me personally realize what a shitty DM I was. I just continually had my guys standing out there.
Yeah, I would say, go listen now, Punted in the Bonds on Wild Die, one of the greatest games ever DM'd.
Well, earlier I asked you if you were using the adventure cards, and you said yes. I would caution you to maybe prune out that deck a little bit, pull out some certain cards that I know before will take a very tense encounter that's already very random with the dice and bennies, and turn it totally anticlimactic because the guy pulls out the card that makes all damage go away or turns a success into a critical failure. I would take those away from the players too. Or if you keep them in play, be ready to roll with what these cards bring in.
Okay. One thing I get your opinion on, I guess. I've just revamped the beginner character sheets for people that I'm introducing completely new to any role-playing game. And as I was working through the sheet, and I've loaded up one for you, I actually put in something, because a lot of the kids would look at the sheets or look at the character and not really know what they were doing. So I put a section in that sort of said what they're good at and what they're bad at. And what that actually taught me as I was going across to each character on the second page, if you're looking, is, so for instance, the one that I've uploaded is a warrior. So she's very good at defending her friends and intimidating people and being heroic and seeing in the dark. But she needs help with enemies with range attacks, controlling a temper, and holding a grudge. So that actually, the more of those characters that I've made, I've realized that if I build my encounters based on what they need help with, right, then not only does that make all the players interact and sort of help each other, but that actually tells me how to build the encounters and give me that. It's balance is not the word I'm looking for, but it gives me that control that I guess I'm after, right? I want the guys to win. I want them to be successful. I want it to be hard, not hard. I want it to be challenging. I want them to have thought that they were in a scrap and what they did meant something, and that's why they overcame the obstacle. So I guess the thing that I've discovered, my advice to those new GMs out there is have a look at the player characters and decide, okay, they're good at not just their hindrances, but have a look at what they're good at and what they're bad at and what they need help with, right? And then build your encounters that tackle those, right? And then
I think it's about giving tough choices to the characters. I mean, I'm looking at that sheet, defending her friends. That's what she's good at, and she's heroic as well. Now, a challenging encounter for that character is where she has to make a choice between saving a friend or defeating a foe. Mm-hmm. Once you lay that out for that character, now it becomes a very tough choice. What is my character gonna do? That's I think what Florian means by interesting encounters. And you don't need balance. You don't need the bad guy to last more than one round to make that choice very clear. It could be a hostage situation, that kind of thing, right?
Sausage.
If you don't want to use the bennies, like the way that the game is designed, and you want to take that element out because you have to do this whole trust thing, you can't come at Savage Worlds as monster in a box, and everybody gets to stand outside the box and throw rocks at him until he's dead. You need to spice it up, and that'll come with practice as a GM. Like just everything. Like Eric said, the bad guy's got one of their buddies captured. He's got a shield. He's got a twin. You should be writing notes on all of the things that you add to the game that throw in these elements where it's not just about killing the boss. And then when it does happen, celebrate it. You take your kids out for food and stuff after. Maybe the guy that killed him gets an extra scoop of ice cream or something like that as for killing the bad guy, kind of a thing, right? But I think because of what you're trying to do, you can't come at Savage Worlds with monster in a room. Just what I'm saying?
Very right.
It's got to be a bigger step than that, a bigger scope, and that might be the key to solving your problem.
So if I'm hearing you right, Gary, what I need to do is play the game with no shirt on, grease on my nipples,
yes,
lollies in a tissue. I'm not sure why they have to be in a tissue. Is that
that
to
was
clean up the mess afterwards, or?
So the kids can clean their tears away when you F their shizzle up. Forgot that.
I have a bottle full of tears in the middle of the table too.
You have to just look the kid in the eye, and you just walk up to him. You put it's like a Benny. You give it the candy with the tissue to him. You look him straight in the eye, and you say, "I'm about to F your up."
Yeah. Something I wanted to add real quick to the bennies, because your main problem seems to me to be that they are your resource only, and so you don't feel it's quite fair to have that many of them stacked up. What I tend to do is borrow from the fate system a bit and add to the benny mechanic from Savage Worlds that I sometimes, as a game master, I offer one of my game master bennies to a player if he plays on that and that quirk. So if the encounter goes against the players, and I have all those bennies sitting there, I can give them to them, and that makes my game master's bennies, if they are all sitting there, that makes my players change their point of view from something, those pile of bennies, that's really bad for us. It makes them a stock of role playing to be had as well.
Yeah.
So it isn't only a bad thing.
Like the cautious hindrance. If your warrior is cautious and wades into battle, you can turn around and say, here's a Benny. I want you to play cautious right now because you don't know that bad guy. You wouldn't just wade into battle like this. I want you to sit back and, examine that.
Are you really sure he's dead?
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about the if they use the Benny, I then get a GM Benny idea? It's sort of like the fate points. No, you're not into those?
I'm not personally.
If you're going to use, I think my personal favorite is the Deadlands DMs or the Deadlands Benny system, because they're colored. So you only get a GM Benny when they use a red Benny, but that red Benny gives them not only a reroll, but an added D6. There's regular Bennies that just act as regular Bennies. There's blue ones that'll give you an extra chance. There's red ones that do the other thing.
Plus, I see he's running Shinetar here. So in Shinetar, there's extra effort for +1 D6. So that wouldn't be a big stretch to use that. But yeah, I mean, Paris, you use that first before actually going into a house rules, because there's Daring Tales. All the Daring Tales put a cap on the number of raises you can roll, the NPC extras can roll. So that is always something you could do. I wouldn't do it because you rob the players or the bad guys into being dangerous or doing something awesome, but it is there. Also, another book that is yet to be published, but I got to see a preview of, has a bad guy where you can only do one wound at a time to it, regardless of the number of raises you scored on your damage roll. It's only one wound at a time, which again, to me, that robs the awesomeness of what the players can do, but it certainly can make a bad guy last longer.
So that's a sneak preview there.
I've always been of the idea that you should never sugarcoat anything. Life does not come at you sugar-coated. But again, I am not. I don't have a group of kids that I'm trying to help. Do you know what I mean? Like my kids, when they were born with a blank slate, and I've molded them into what they are. If I took my pants off and took a crap on the chair at the dinner table, my kids wouldn't flinch because they'd be like, "Oh, that's just dad." Not that I ever do that kind of stuff, but I've never hid anything from them. If they ask me a question, it's always like a direct and scientific answer, and this is why it is the way it is. And it's because my philosophy is life isn't going to come at you sugar-coated. You're not going to have some shields appear around your car when you're about to get into an accident. It's going to be a collision, and you're going to get hurt. And that's life. That's just the way it is. My kids are like, "Oh, why haven't we seen Nana and Papa in a while?" And I'm like, "Because they're dead." What happened to the dog? He got run over and he's squished in the ditch. I think that you should use the GM bennies instead of sugarcoating your Savage Worlds game. But if you don't, look at all these other cool ideas that you have.
Yeah, look,
I agree with Paris though. I don't even use GM bennies when I'm playing with my regular guys because I think they're lame. I think they
I know. So without trying to start a whole other debate on the subject, the two guys that are here right now that are sort of using their own specific Savage World rules have both complained about Savage Worlds not working or doing something that they think that it should do in perspective to other systems.
It's not anything to do with other systems. I just think that GM bennies destroy drama and they take away from the players, and it does feel unfair.
Yeah, that's why I don't use them. So don't get me wrong, my games, a big part of what we explore is consequence of action, how to overcome obstacles, how to overcome failure. Failure is a big thing that we explore, right? That's one of the beauties of having random dice is when things go pear-shaped is to think outside the box or to take a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage or get around it or whatever the case may be. So it's not a case of, they're not handled with kid gloves, but so to me, like Harrison said, the GM Benny to me, they just seem like a direct attack on the player. That's the way I view a GM Benny, right? It's because it's not the ones that are allocated to that particular being. It's the one that I pull out and go, ha ha, right? And it just doesn't feel right to me, that particular
but to me, GM Bennies are part of the game. You can't take a part away from the game and then complain that it doesn't work the way it should work.
No,
the players don't pull punches against my bad guys. They'll go full on, and if I want to challenge them, I'm not going to pull any punches either. I'm going to play them smart. I'm going to play them ruthless, and I'm going to spend my GM bennies because it's part of how the game is supposed to work, the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, the only difference is I'm not complaining.
I've used 8 GM bennies to try and make enough vigor rolls to keep my bad guy alive. It's not like I haven't used them, right? I'm not complaining about the system. I'm asking how to mitigate a situation where I feel it can create a negative experience, right? And you guys have outlined, well, if that happens, then it's up to the GM to turn that negative experience around or not put it in that situation in the first place, which I've fully taken on board, which is fantastic. And I will use from here on in. I will leave out the chicken and the lollies and stuff.
You're leaving out the best part, buddy.
Yeah, come on, Paris. That was basically most of this show is getting cut out except for that bit.
We might just start with table flipping and chicken and not worry about dice.
I've said it before that there was this one fight with this ogre on this train. We had what's the unstable platform. We had some darkness going on. There was a bunch of just things that I added up that helped with the complexity of it. But the real kicker for me, and I remember that fight. specifically because that was the one fight that I had that taught me that I could use my bennies to be like putty. And if I wanted to stretch the combat out, I would use my bennies. And if I didn't, I wouldn't use my bennies. But that's, to me, what GM bennies are like putty to me. And they allow me to manipulate the combat to make it harder or easier depending on how I want this to go. But I see what you're saying, because your predicament is more along the lines of sometimes I roll all my bennies and I still can't do what I need to do. So I'm thinking that your best approach would be never put your players or your bad guy in the situation where he's just a character in a box. Always have that extra bit, and maybe that'll remedy your situation where they've got 2 things or 3 things to focus on. Save the bad guy, figure out how to take down the shield, or not, sorry, save the, a character that's important to them, kill the bad guy, deactivate something. Hopefully this helps, Paris. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm looking at this was actually really informative for me as well, because it's nice to get a bunch of collective like minds together. This podcast, this episode to me was like watching 5 streams or 5 different DMs play and getting everybody's input all at the same time and sort of seeing, picking the best parts of it.
I really agree. There's so many helpful things on here. I've learned a lot today, actually. So thanks everyone for the advice.
Yeah, this was a good topic for me. I really enjoyed this. Like, I feel like I learned quite a few things today.
I've actually, I've just learned things just listening to you guys. Even though you didn't say it specifically, it's triggered other things within me. So I hope that, anyone listening to this gets that as well.
You guys are ready to wrap this up?
Hell yeah.
Yo, motherfuckers, you all best back up. I always got a gun, I always come strap up. This ain't a game of pool, it ain't no time for no rack up. It's the motherfucking time for the motherfucking wrap up. Anyone who disagrees will get smack up. See me back in school when I shouldn't have learned to add up. Found a gun on the floor, instead I picked that up. Anyway, sorry, I'm motherfucking back up. What I'm trying to say is it's time for the wrap up. Yeah, this one goes out to all the ladies and all the men out there. Everyone in the front row, grease up. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, for the wrap up, can't thank Paris enough for coming on the show. And I can't say he was under fire, but we certainly try to understand what was going on. And I think a lot of people are in his situation. So that was, like Gary said earlier, I think we all learned something from this, either the mentality or a few tips and how to think the game differently, because, yeah, it is a different beast. So thank you, Paris.
Well, thank you guys. Thank Grim especially. Like, some of the stuff that he said today, just thinking of it like an action movie and stuff like that. It just takes those little things sometimes to sort of you click, and then it connects the 2 dots in your brain. For me, that's quite an incredible situation. But yeah, no, all you guys, just the input. Again, though, we'll leave out the food bit, but. No, so thank you for organizing to bring him on. Thank you for having me on. Thank you. It was awesome.
Yeah, at this point, I think we're pretty much looking for excuses to bring you back on the show. So, because we like hanging out with you, we like talking to you. And I know last time Gary missed it because he was hunting bear in the woods. And yeah, also the guy I brought on the show so we could hear his views and learn more about him, get to meet him, Florian Krell from Grim Perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, man. It's been really great. And I always know when I'm preparing that stuff, when I prepare my YouTube videos, I do a lot of research and stuff. But I think it's really important that we just have a discussion here and can really go into what the other one really wants to know now, no? I really found it really interesting that we could ask so many questions, really get into another one's perspective and try to figure out what would help him most at that point. I really like the time here. So anytime you're willing to have me and have something that might be up my alley, just give me a call.
Will do.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're going to have links to his show, his YouTube show on there. Give it a listen. He touches on a lot of different topics for Savage Worlds, breaks it down for you. And I mean, I think you've got a taste of how he lays things out. It's a different view, and I'm glad it helped Paris. Some things clicked for him because of that, because at some point, like I said, I kept trying to explain things, but sometimes you don't find the right words, and Florian did this, so thank you.
Yeah, if I can just highlight one or two things, because you guys know some of my videos, and if you listen to this and want to go into a bit more depth on certain parts, I've made a video concerning randomness in Savage Worlds and how to handle it. That might be a good video to start. And we touched on a lot of other things, like how we get things from Dungeons and Dragons that don't really help us as a game master. And I recently done a video on that, and I'm gonna upload it right after this episode. So if you want to start watching videos in my channel, I would recommend those for you.
Yeah, I watched the excessive randomness one last night when I was steaming drunk, and it was really good.
Do you recommend watching it drunk, Harrison?
Probably sober, because obviously you're very very clever, very eloquent person, and I was absolutely munted. I came home and there were two people outside my flats trying to steal the pumpkins that are outside, and I came home and I didn't really care because I was drunk. I thought, just take it if you want, and they pretended they were trying to take a picture of it.
Did you help them? You're like, here, let me carry that for you, brother.
So if you want to get in contact with us, you can email us at thewilddie@gmail.com, or you can go to the Google Plus community and find us at the Wild Die Podcast, and of course find us on the Nerds International Google Plus community, and we're on Twitter at the Wild Die. Of course, if you'd like to support the show, go over to patreon.com/the Wild Die. And at this point, we'd like to thank all of our patrons, who are Sean Richer, Zovia, Tony Fanning, Rob Towell, John Peterson, Manuel Sams, David Maurice Garrett, James Clark, Peter Beckett, Peter Adams, Tom Lewis, Perry Chalmers, Digital Dungeon Master, Stefan Dragonspawn, Eli Kurtz, Matthew J. Hansen, Wanton Beats, Matt Stark, John Steve, Thor Mongrel, Owen Lean, Andy Hall, and Christopher Gray. And of course, we've got a new patron called Bubbles. What? Is that true?
Yeah, Bubbles. Awesome.
Is this real? Or has somebody been messing with the show notes?
No, it's his handle on Patreon.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, welcome.
Bubbles.
Welcome, Bubbles.
All right. So this is Eric saying, short mobsters get paid under the table.
And this is Harrison saying, grapple the skies.
Excellent stuff. Thanks for coming out, guys. I appreciate that. That was a fantastic, great episode. Double thumbs up from the fat guy from Canada. This is Gary saying, keep your pants on. Keep it fun. Thanks, everyone. Anybody up for some KFC?
The Wild Die Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of their respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Die Podcast.